This is The Road Show, and I'm your host, David Warren. On today's program, we welcome Danny Lynchard, author of the book, The Heart of a Cop, Stories of Personal Faith from the Line of Duty. Danny Lynchard has served as Director of Chaplaincy for the Tulsa Police Department for more than 30 years, and he'll join us here in just a bit to tell us what it really means to be a police officer. But first, I want to introduce that she's really my co-host today. She's along for the ride. Pun intended there if you've ever done a ride along with a police officer. Her name is Pam Norwood, and she is the office manager here at Oasis. And how long have you been in your position, Pam?
Probably 25 years.
25 years. And we hear you, especially during support days, you host with me at that time, well, once in the spring and once in the fall, when we encourage all of our listeners to support us financially here at the Oasis, as we are a listener-supported ministry. But today, I wanted you to sit in on this and even ask a question or two as it comes to you, but for the purpose of you getting some insight, as the rest of us do, on what it really means to be a cop. Oh, boy. She's already getting teary. Your son, your youngest son, your baby, how old is he?
27.
27. And he came to you and said, Mom, I want to be a cop.
I'm going to be a cop. I'm going to school, and I'm going to be a police officer.
And how did that go over in the Norwood home?
Well, I mean, David, you raise your kids to be what they want to be. He's full of the Holy Ghost. He has it in him. He knows what to do. So he's going to be a great one.
So why are you crying?
Oh, it's a mom thing. All the moms out there know of all the things you don't want your baby in harm's way. But, David his name is David.
I was going to say, we're all named David around here.
Yeah, his name is David. David has in him the Holy Ghost. So he knows, and he pleads the blood of Jesus. He knows all the right things. So he'll make a great police officer when he finishes school. So he's, and David has, he's lost almost 300 pounds so he can become a police officer.
Was that one of the main reasons? Because he was a very large young man.
He was. And now he's a little skinny young man. That's the reason. That's the reason. He wanted to be a police officer. So.
Well, again, our guest today is Danny Lynchard. He is the Director of Chaplaincy for the Tulsa Police Department and also the Fire Department.
Yes.
But we're going to really focus on the police force today and his interaction with our officers and what a chaplain does. But Danny has written this new book, and it's full of 60 stories of personal faith from the line of duty. And I thought I'd read a portion of Chapter 1, and then we'll take a break and we'll bring in our guest. But this is called 17 Seconds. And Danny writes, there are a lot of protocols set in place to prevent the taking of a life. All of those protocols try to take into consideration the officer's adrenaline, fear, confusion, and commitment. When it is all said and done, the officer must stand alone and decide in just seconds if his life or the life of another is in danger. He cannot ask advice. He cannot look at the policy manual. He cannot take a deep breath and think about it for a minute. It is his decision, and at that moment, it is his alone. The danger has hurled him into a world that has shrunk to the size of a perpetrator only, and he sees little else. Sometimes it is the smell of gunpowder and the thunder of a weapon that brings one back into reality. Then thousands of people get to read the facts that local television and newspapers give them. From those facts, some decide, to the point of insurrection, the rightness and wrongness of the officer's actions. Danny says, a year or so earlier, I had stopped in to check on an officer who just hours previously had made the decision to terminate the threat. The television was on, but the volume was turned all the way down. As a result of television police stories, people think that every cop that shoots someone is a bit of a loner. The character they envision is usually a single guy, either by divorce or a personality that pushes people away. It makes for good television, but is simply untrue in most of the cases. This officer lived in a neighborhood of tract housing. His lawn was mowed, his wife worked at a local hospital, The only thing that made his dwelling look different than all the others was the patrol car parked in his driveway. Danny says, when I entered his living room, he was sitting in his recliner with his dark-haired 3-year-old daughter curled up in his lap, asleep, while he stared at the clock on the wall. His eyes were focused on the second hand of the large clock. Every time the hand on the clock jumped 17 times, the officer would say, "It's over." He was reliving the total time between contact with the individual and the pull of his trigger. 17 seconds between the introduction to a stranger and his dismissal. You do not get to know if the man has a family, or if his parents love him, or whether or not he is a Democrat or Republican. In 17 seconds, the introduction is made, commands to stop are disregarded, a long knife is pulled and flipped into throwing position, an arm with a knife is raised, and within less than half a second, the roar and fire come from the barrel of the officer's gun, and 17 seconds is over. 17 seconds has terminated one life and altered another for the rest of his life. And the beat goes on. When we come back, author Danny Lynchard joins us to share more stories of personal faith from the line of duty. Back after this. I'm David Warren, Program Director at Oasis Radio Network and one of the hosts of this podcast. All of our hosts enjoy hearing from you, our listening family, so drop us a note. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and you'll receive new episodes on your mobile devices. And now, back to the show. Well, on the Road Show, I'm here. I'm David Warren. And Pam, you cleaned up nicely.
I cleaned up nicely.
Yeah, Pam was crying during the first segment because, and by the way, I should tell our guest, Danny Lynchard, good to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Not a stranger to the Roadshow because you're a regular listener, but
Very much
your first
so.
time on the program.
Yes.
Pam is in the room because I wanted her, as our office manager, to hear some of these stories that you'll be sharing from the line of duty that you have lived with all of these police officers for more than 30 years.
Right.
Because her son is going to school to be a police officer.
Really? Outstanding.
So, would you recommend this line of work to her as a mom?
As a mom, I can't think of if I were not a minister, that's what I would do. Because I think as a police officer and as a police chaplain, you get the opportunity to bring the greatest healer to the greatest hurting in your city. That's who you deal with. You also get a chance to bring a positive faith. When the news media looks for something exciting, they want it to be negative and dramatic. That's why it's so full of police stories, because the most dramatic and most negative stories happen within the realm of police officers. And when you've got someone there with a simple faith that knows how to approach people with a service attitude and a passion that goes beyond what's seen, if they feed on the job, if the job feeds them, many people talk about they don't know how the police do what they do. Well, they do what they love to do. That's what they're all about. And I can't think of a better way to serve people than a person with a heart after God. In fact, the first policemen were angels. In the Garden of Eden, when the crime was committed, God posted angels to set off the crime scene and protect the crime scene so that nobody could get in there. And the Bible is full of stories about policemen. It was at the foot of the cross, the only person to give an affirmative statement to who Jesus was that law enforcement officer that said, "Surely this man is the Son of God." When Jesus talked about faith in the city of Capernaum, it was a policeman that he said, "I've not seen so great a faith in all of Israel." So thank you for giving your son to the community and believing God to protect them, because he will.
Danny, you are the Director of Chaplaincy for both the Tulsa Police and Fire Departments.
Yes.
How many men and women serve in these departments?
There's about 1,600 now.
Are there a lot of believers in the group?
Yes, more than people think. And I'll tell you why. Policemen see the best people at the worst of times. They also fall. And when a policeman falls, it's usually not gracefully. And so although there's a lot of faith, that they have seen, and this is difficult to say, but it's true, they have seen some of the most vocal Christians be arrested for some of the most uncommon things. In their own line of duty, there is such a temptation there that if they make a huge stand for Christ, then they fall, it's such an embarrassment to them and to the body of Christ as a whole that they don't make a big display of their faith.
I think that's for everyone.
Yeah, it could
Christians,
be.
I'm referring to.
It could be. But I know that's true with policemen. Through the years there, when I first came on, I didn't know how you could be a policeman and wear a gun. Or how you could turn the other cheek once and then blow them away. I didn't know if that was the way you did it. But after being there and watching them do their job, and I've buried them, I've married them, I've been there when their children were born, I've prayed with them through their surgeries, I've been there and prayed with them through when they had to shoot someone and when they've gotten shot. And there is a great faith in that law enforcement community and in the fire department community that people will seldom see unless they look at their actions and how they really reach out and try to touch people.
It's good to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm glad we're talking about this subject. So, as we discuss your new book, The Heart of a Cop, I was thinking about how to conduct this interview, and I'm glad I included Pam. And Pam, you're going to feel a whole lot better about your son's decision by the end of today's program.
Good.
But my idea was to discuss the natural, mental, and spiritual elements of being a cop. And I'm going to start with the natural element. So, what qualifications does one need to serve?
First of all, they really need a sense of humor. A sense of humor gives you a break away from the dramatic. And a lot of people don't understand, sometimes policemen at a terrible crime scene. For instance, I remember when there was a young man on Mother's Day, had gone out in front of his mother's kitchen window and hung himself in a tree with the TV cable. And I remember the officers standing in a group there, and this young man hanging from a tree, because people don't understand, they can't just walk up and cut that person down. They have to wait for the medical examiner to get there. They're in charge of the scene, and they do their examination, and then they cut him down. So this young man is hanging from a tree, and people of the neighborhood are beginning to come around and say, why are they letting him do that? The officers were standing in a huddle, and they were laughing. And the community was seeing it, and what they didn't understand was that laughter was to separate them from the drama they were having to face and the fact that they had to leave that person there in front of the community. Finally, they've developed a way that they actually can put up a screen now with sheets on it to block the view. But humor is a way that separates them. In fact, psychologists tell us that even chaplains need to have a good sense of humor, because that's what allows you to break from the drama. Mm-hmm. So I'd say, first of all, a good sense of humor, and policemen have it. They all have nicknames for each other. The pranks that they pull on each other are just outstanding. I remember several years ago, Harry Ekus, who's passed on now, used to chew tobacco. The red man in a pouch, you remember that? And he pulled up one night to get his chew of tobacco, and it was probably about 2 a.m, and someone had put a tarantula in his tobacco pouch. And that was that. But they do things like that. Or if you accidentally leave your radio on in your car, there's a way that radio can become a loudspeaker. And one of the officers was asleep. He'd gotten off shift and was asleep, and some of the officers surrounded his house and keyed their mics and called him out, told him he was under arrest, with all the community turning the lights on. And that's the kind of humor that they have. And the other thing is a sense of integrity. Your sense of being honest and having integrity has to be bigger than the fear of getting in trouble.
How do you determine that in the interview?
You know, we have a group out at the academy that do extensive interviews with officers. One of the things I remember being there's a tower at the shooting range that operates all the targets, and we had a young lady trying to become an officer. She was an APO, and she did not have enough strength in her forefinger to pull the trigger, so she was cheating and using her middle finger, which you're not allowed to do. And I sat in the guard tower, and I won't give you the guy's name, but he was watching her with a pair of binoculars. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, we've told her not to use the middle finger to pull that trigger, and if I catching her doing it, she's out of here." And I said to him, that's an awful little thing to lose your job over. And his response to me was this: "Danny, I can teach them to be a police officer. I can give them all the equipment they need. I can teach them how to do the job. And the one thing I cannot give them is honesty. Mm-hmm. And if they don't come here with that, I can't make a good cop out of them."
Meaning she knew she wasn't supposed to
right,
be doing that.
Right, she'd been told, don't you do that. And she said she wasn't doing it, but they knew that she probably had been. And that's what he was watching for.
Well, the cover of your book, The Heart of a Cop, 60 Stories of Personal Faith from the Line of Duty. There are 3 police officers, and the middle one, where the focus is greatest, is a female police officer. What is the ratio?
I looked at that just a few months ago, and I'm afraid to give you the number because I think there's somewhere around 17%. But I'm just reaching for a memory there. I'm not sure. That's Angela Emberton. That was in her APO class, and that's the look of she had on her face when they commissioned her as a police officer. That was that moment when they said, "Your congratulations, you're now Tulsa police officers."
I love that. I thought this might be a stock photo.
No,
that's
one of our Tulsa police officers. That's Angela Emberton.
Wow. So is the physical training the same for men and women?
Yes.
I was going to say, because they have to face the same issues and
it's the same
people,
and they do it. They've proven themselves, and they do it. They do the job.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the uniform and equipment, including the squad car, the police car. The uniform. What is so important on a uniform?
Well, it used to, and we still have some old guys there that just love that green uniform. They went to the blue because it was standard pretty much throughout the country. In the old uniform, they had a stripe down the leg on the uniform, and I used to wonder what that stripe was for. And what they used to tell kids is, if you ever get lost in a crowd, look for a pair of pants with a stripe on it, and you found a friend, and talk to him. And one policeman said the stripe was there so when they got up in the morning, they could look and they'd know where to put their boots on. They could follow the line down. But today, it's that uniform is a particular color. It is designed to reflect to the people, this is where you can get help. If you see this color uniform, if you see a person there, you can get help there. That's what that's for. The badge is incredibly important to a police officer because they had to work so hard to get it. In fact, when the rookies come in to the academy for the first, and it might be their whole academy training, if someone with a badge walks by them, they have to stop, get up against the wall, and stand at attention until the badge goes by. Because that badge means you now have the authority of the entire city behind you. You represent the city of Tulsa, and you represent their expression of what life should be like in Tulsa.
I wish the civilian population would do that as well.
Cool, it'd be cool. Yeah, but that's when they see a badge, they have to stand at attention until the badge passes by.
Showing respect.
Showing respect for that badge and what it takes to wear it and earn it.
Okay, tell us about the gun.
That gun is a tool. It is a tool for the safety of the officer. It is a tool for the safety of his family. It is a tool for the safety of the people of Tulsa. It is a tool for the safety of his fellow officers. And like any tool, they're good at using it. They study how it works. They shoot it endlessly. And I don't understand why people want to challenge them, because if you pull a gun on a police officer, he's going to shoot you, and he's not going to shoot you in a fashion expecting you to be wounded and live from it. He's going to shoot you in a fashion to terminate the threat. That's the term. You have to stop the threat. And they're very good at it. They practice with it. They hope to never have to use it. I've been with them when they've gone through their first shooting incident, and it's incredible. Everything slows down once that gun is fired. I had one officer tell me he actually heard the bullet tear through the flesh. And I remember one officer's shooting where he was back in the squad room, and he was, you could see he'd taken his first life, and that's a hard thing. And his wife came in, fell on his shoulders, and just cried and said, "You've had to kill somebody. I may never see you in heaven now because you committed a murder." And not understanding that there's a difference between murder and acting in safety. Romans 13 says that policeman doesn't carry that weapon for no reason, that it's there for a reason, and if it's necessary, he will use it. And I think a good lesson for people is to learn how, as a believer, as civilian believers, instead of learning how to be afraid of them, we need to learn how to respect them in a biblical way. And the Bible says you respect all authority. I am amazed at the way Daniel would address Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a heathen, but Daniel addressed him as, "May you live forever. God has put you in this place." And even though Nebuchadnezzar was nothing to be admired by a Jew who was held captive by him, he was treated with respect because somehow he believed God put him in authority there. And we would save so many lives if people would just do what that officer told them to do.
Wouldn't it be nice if in our schools, and maybe they are doing this, but they would teach children, if an officer does or says this, you do this or don't do this?
Oh, it would be. I was at a city council meeting right after one of the police shootings, and part of the community was there, and all the city councilors were there. And one of the city councilors actually said, "Can we put together a little booklet of some kind that we can put in the schools and we can give to our citizens that says, what do you do when a policeman stops you?" But David, it's not that complicated. It's as easy as do what he tells you. Mm-hmm. Just do what he tells you. If that is a bad cop and he has an intention, which I've never met one who stopped someone and said, "I hope I get to kill him." I've never met one like that. But if there is one like that, your chances are still better if you do what they tell you to do.
True.
We have times in Tulsa now where people are now they're throwing their hands up and backing away and not doing anything the officer says, but they're safe because they got their hands up. And so it winds up being a conflict on the side of the road. And then people get hurt, physically hurt. Our officers get hurt.
Well, maybe next time we'll talk about the police car and all of its functions, but I would really like to end this segment with you telling one of the stories from your book, The Heart of a Cop, available on Amazon.com by today's special guest, Danny Lynchard. Danny, Lynchard, Danny Lynchard. And this is chapter 2, called The True Story Behind the Famous Photograph. Now, what photograph are you referring to?
We're talking about the photograph of the firefighter when the Murrah building was bombed. There's a famous photograph of a firefighter bringing a little child out with his legs draping over his arms and his head falling back, obviously a dead baby, and bringing him out and taking him away from the exploded building there, the bombed building at the Murrah building. He was one of the children that you see the markers for now. Mm-hmm. And that photograph went all over the United States. It's beautiful. It's so such an explanation of that job and the heart-wrenching job it can really become. But on that day, I was there that day within a few hours after the bombing, and everybody was working together. There were paramedics, there were police officers, all of them going through the rubble trying to save lives. And what people don't realize is the way that firefighter got that baby is a policeman went into the rubble, found the baby, and placed it in the arms of the firefighter, who came out of the smoke and the cinder and gave it to a paramedic who did his best in preserving the life of the child. And what I wanted people to know is we're all in it together. It's not about police, it's not about fire, it's not about just paramedics, but we're all in it together, and God uses all of them to gather one great purpose. And that was kind of the reason I wrote the story.
That's wonderful. Danny Lynchard, our special guest. We'll be back after this.
Oasis Roadshow.
I'm Karen Jensen Salisbury, one of the hosts you hear on the Oasis Network Roadshow. For 35 years, this 1 hour of the day has inspired and motivated you, our listeners, with thousands of stories of people whose lives demonstrate the truth that with God, all things are possible. It's an hour that you should make a part of your day, Monday through Friday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Central. The Roadshow, an Oasis Network presentation.
Reading from the back of the book we're talking about today by Danny Lynchard, The Heart of a Cop. This is a collection of 60 true stories direct from the line of duty and the inner struggles involved when sirens scream and lives are changed forever. And you know, this book could not have come out at a better time, Danny. This was the leading of the Holy Spirit. Let's talk a little bit about the climate in America in regard to the dynamic between some of the public and the police officers across our country.
It's very strange right now. It's tense among the police officers. Many of them know that it's possible that they could be sitting in their police car filling out a report and still not go home at the end of the day. Our officers here in Tulsa have been talked to and have been try to be prepared for such an incident as that. But I've got let me talk about not just as a whole, but let me talk about Tulsa specifically. So many people still don't realize the impact the race riots had in the 1920s. The impact of that day and time of officers and citizens going into the black community, killing and burning and annihilating one of the most financially prosperous black communities in the world. And the talk of that is still taught from generation to generation to generation, and the fear of police are passed down in Tulsa from generation to generation. It's still very much alive. Tulsa's had a lot of growth, and the new people that come haven't realized what an impact that has. So that's still there. And with that being said, Tulsa has managed to be one of the leading communities in the United States on how to unite the community and the police department. The three goals of the chaplaincy that we established early on was to provide a bridge of communication between the police department and the citizens. There are so many things that the police don't understand about the citizens, and there's so many things the citizens don't understand about the police, and I could go into that if you like. But I think it's important, and which is why this came out at this time, for people to say that cops are human too. They're one of us. They come out of the same apple barrel in the community, and they have some of the same emotions and some of the same feelings. They're called on to respond differently with them, but we're all a community. Some of them wear blue uniforms, but they're still brothers and sisters to the rest of the community. And that's the lesson I'd love for people to learn.
Danny, the climate that currently does exist in America, that dynamic between civilians and police officers, has that altered the way that officers respond? Are they hesitating before pulling the trigger?
Yes.
And how is that working out?
Yeah. Well, it hasn't been going on long enough to see how that's going to work out. I'm afraid that it's going to work out in one of our officers being injured or killed, because there is a hesitancy. It used to be the statement among law officers, it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 1. And now I don't know if that's true anymore, because it can become a real deal if you actually pull that weapon, and our officers are making every opportunity they can before they go to that. And it concerns them, it concerns me. And it could all be solved so easily, just so easily, by just deciding not to hold court on the side of the street, but hold it for a later time, instead of deciding I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to be what this officer says, instead of just saying, okay, I'll be compliant. My argument isn't with you right now. It's with the court, and we'll take it up there.
Mm-hmm. Good advice.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about the mental element of being a police officer. When a policeman or a policewoman is going through the process, going through the academy, how do those in power decide if this is going to be a good fit, if they're mentally, not just physically, but mentally fit to be a police officer?
Well, the training's pretty intense, and you can see how they respond to the training. They also look at family. Do they have a strong family support system? Other things like that.
So are you saying then if like maybe the spouse is not in agreement, that could be
it
a
could
factor
be a problem.
in being
Sure.
accepted or not?
Sure. It's not really funny, but we made a joke out of saying, I've married a lot of police officers, some of the same ones 2 or 3 times. I mean, it's really, we made a joke saying if we want to raise money, we'll sell bumper stickers that says honk if you've been married to a police officer, because the field is so ripe. But the noise would be deafening, but and it's really not funny, but they do require a strong family support. And even with that, if that officer doesn't communicate with his spouse and help her understand or help him understand that job instead of shutting them off. And you don't want to bring that stuff home. I can remember one of our officers going into a home, and he sees a body on the floor that's been stabbed, and he goes upstairs and he sees 2 more, and he says to himself, God don't let it be kids, but it is. Someone has come in, killed the babysitter, and chased the kids around and stabbed the kids. He doesn't want to go home and share that with his wife. But he's got it. It's part of him now. It's part of who he is now. And it takes a strong spouse.
Are officers encouraged to share with their spouses
Yes.
about their day?
Yes, very much so. Make them as much a part of it as you can. Help them understand. Absolutely. Psych services, we have a psych services that's available to our officers, all of it free of charge. We have chaplaincy that's available, it's free of charge. And we all encourage the spouses to get involved in anything they can. There is a police auxiliary where the spouses can get involved and learn about the job. There are Citizens Academy where the spouses can go through a Citizens Academy and do everything their spouse does.
Really?
Oh, it's cool. In
How
fact,
about Pam here, the mom?
Yes, Pam, you need to do that.
Me too.
Can mom do it?
Sure, it's for all ages, and I encourage all the ministers to do it. And they go through. They take you through everything the officer does and let you do and understand that the shoot don't shoot is really a cool thing that they do with the citizens. They put a gun in their hand and they have actors that do the real scenarios, and you decide if you're going to shoot or not shoot. And I got shot.
Well, it was rubber bullets, because you're here with us, Danny Lynchard, the author of The Heart of a Cop. And before I ask you to read a story from your book, let's talk about motive. How do those that are the trainers, those in power at the academy, how do they weed out improper motives for people coming in to be a police officer?
That's a question you're going to have to get with them. I wish I could tell you how they do that. And they do very good. The psychological testing is extensive. The background search is extensive.
Let me rephrase the question
Okay.
then. What should a police officer's motive or motives be to enter into the force?
The standard answer is to serve and protect the community I want to live in. But to me, the best answer would be, I have a passion to be a police officer, and I want to be the best one I can. That, to me, is the best answer.
If you would, read chapter 3 from your book.
I'd be glad to. When I arrived, the 2 police officers were standing outside a little rundown house that seemed to have been wedged into the space between 2 other homes in downtown Tulsa. There was no yard. The front porch came all the way out to the sidewalk. There was no screen door, no storm door, just a wooden door that used to be white, but smudges and peeling paint left it multicolored. The body of a 67-year-old lady was lying in the bathroom floor, apparently the result of some sort of heart attack. The key word, of course, is apparently. The officers aren't doctors, they're policemen. The scene had all the appearance of a heart attack, but they have done the job long enough to know appearances are deceiving. So they do their job. They secure the scene, guard the scene, and make sure no one goes in to change the scene until the medical examiner comes to remove the body. The sun beating down on them, they stood there in their dark blue uniforms like a mop soaked in hot water. Yet they were maintaining a pleasant attitude. The lady's daughter had called them. Her home was just around the corner. She was on her way back to the scene and very unhappy. When she arrived, she demanded entrance back into the home, and when the police politely informed her she could not go in and spent an ample time explaining why she couldn't enter, the officers were berated beyond normal tolerance. Yet they listened, expressed understanding and concern, but could not violate the proper protocol. She called them names, she judged their motives, insulted their pride in their department. The language she used had to be learned from the gutter. I pulled her aside and attempted to explain. She was polite to me, even respectful, but her contempt for the men and women in uniform was far beyond the merits of the current situation. I led her back to her home away from the officers. I had her drink a glass of water while I went back to visit the young men in blue. I apologized to the officers for her actions and for words. One of them said, "Chaplain, 60 seconds after I leave this call, I'll forget all those things and be on my way to something else." I looked at him and thought for several seconds. What he had really said was, "It really bothers me right now. Her words sting and I wish I could change her, but it'll be better when I can get out of here." The officer's demeanor was very stoic. The normal public would never know that the words of someone so inconsiderate would matter. They were not just words of grief, but words of hatred built up inside an individual whose addictions had placed her in negative situations with cops for some time. Yet, even her opinion mattered. Probably more so because these two men genuinely hurt for her in this time of grief. The medical examiner came, the body was removed, and I watched the two of them drive off in their patrol cars, and I glanced at my watch for the next 60 seconds.
And then at the end of each chapter, you have what's called a focus, shield, and prayer segment. Tell us about this section.
Sometimes you can get caught up in the story and not get the main point of what it's trying to say. And so the focus is to give that the main point.
Let me read one.
Okay.
So the focus of the story you just read: to speak to officers in such a manner is not different than striking a person that is handcuffed. We demand officers follow proper protocol, yet it sometimes leads them into submitted verbal abuse. Then you give the shield, and I'll go ahead and read it. Words are seeds that we can plant in the garden of the heart of others. We can let them stay, grow, and produce their bitter fruit, or we can cast them from our thoughts and replace them with better seeds. And then the prayer. Our Heavenly Father, you have the words of life. Help us shut out the voices that belittle and let us hear from a God that lifts our spirits to new heights. Before we take our final break, tell us, who did you have in mind when you wrote this book?
I actually had in mind the community as a whole, nationwide, to say, I want you to look inside of these lives and maybe you'll see something you haven't seen before. You've watched television, you've seen movies, but this is reality. It's raw, and I hope you get to see and know who these men and women really are.
60 stories.
60 stories.
And you're a wonderful writer.
Well, thank you. I never saw myself. I feel like I want to have written, not to write.
Danny Lynchard is your name, and people can type that name in on Amazon.com and pull up the book, The Heart of a Cop. It's available, again, on Amazon.com, and Danny's last name is spelled Lynchard. I'm David Warren. Pam Norwood's here for the ride along, and Danny Lynchard, our very special guest.
Thank you, David.
Back for the wrap-up after this. I'm David Warren, here with some exciting news for Oasis listeners. We have a new mobile device app. It's free, easy to download, and lets you enjoy our refreshing music and talk everywhere you go. If you have an Android cell phone, go to the Google Play Store And if you have an iPhone or iPad, visit the Apple Store and search for Oasis Radio Network. Be an Oasis ambassador and share this news with family and friends around the world. Here's a little bit about today's guest and the author of the book. We've been talking about the heart of a cop, Danny Lynchard. He is the Tulsa Police and Fire chaplain. He's a 40-year veteran of the ministry and public service who has been there to observe and assist both civilians and emergency personnel. As head of a cadre of chaplains working with over 1,500 police officers and firefighters in a major city, Tulsa, he will tell you that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the heart that beats inside the chest of today's true heroes. Beautifully written, Danny.
I'm impressed myself.
Tell us why, and let's start with how you became a chaplain and then the director of chaplaincy.
I was doing a youth meeting in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. There's a school there that had an auditorium, and someone had told me about a police officer that was a Christian and gave his testimony. I thought, no, I just don't know how that can be, and so I found him and brought him into my office. His name was Bob Fagan. Bob was Officer of the Year that year, had a Medal of Valor. I mean, he was the poster boy for I want to be a cop someday. Just a good-looking guy. And he came in and sat down across from me, and he said, I need to tell you that I'm a Christian, but I'm also fighting the battle, and I'm not winning the battle right now, and I just don't feel like I can give a testimony. And he told me that he worked with the drunks downtown, and he was afraid he was going to become one downtown. We talked with him for a while, and he actually took me in his patrol car and introduced me to some of his people he was helping. And we came back, and we prayed together, and he went on about his job. And I was thinking 2 weeks later, I should call Bob. I should call him and at least encourage him in his faith. And I didn't. And one morning I walked out just a couple weeks later on the front page of the newspaper said, Officer of the Year takes his own life in a patrol car in the basement of the police department. And it was Bob. And I thought, like everybody, when you're around a suicide, everybody takes some of the blame. And I went to Chief Harry Stiggy at the time, and I said, Chief, my name is Danny Lynchard. This is what happened, and I want to help. I don't even know how to help. I want to help in some way. And he said, we're just beginning a chaplaincy program. Would you be interested? And I said, yeah, I'll do whatever I can. And that's how I got involved in it. That was the catalyst. And we began a prayer partner program for police officers and wound up being in 60 cities with about 1,200 officers on our prayer list. And National Geographic did the story when they came to Tulsa.
Great.
And so that's how I got involved in it. That's what took place.
And then you became the director of chaplaincy for both the police and fire departments here in our city.
About 5 years later, yeah. About 5 years later. And started from there.
Are you looking for help?
Always. But I'll tell you what, police chaplaincy it's one of those things that God called you to, so you don't walk away so quickly. We have people that's been there 20, 21, 22 years serving as a volunteer chaplain.
What do they do?
The best way I can put it is we are the spiritual paramedics for the critical incidents here in Tulsa. We make all the death notifications for any unexpected death in Tulsa. Fire fatalities, traffic fatalities, homicides, suicides, weather fatalities, drownings. My fellow chaplains are the ones that go to that door and make that knock and say, could we come in and sit down and visit with you? We have something to tell you. And they make that notification. They help them through that first 24 to 72 hours, depending on what the need is, and try to refer them to their own pastor, to their own network.
What do you say to family members?
The best thing to do, anybody can, I've never seen a good death notification. There's no such thing. I've seen some bad ones, but I've never seen a good one. The best thing you can do is, because of the shock and because of the disbelief that's going to take place, the best thing to do is sit someone down and say, my name is Danny Lynchard. I work with the Tulsa Police Department. Is your son Tom? Yes, he is. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but Tom was killed in an accident earlier today. And you just stop. That's where you start, because from that point on, what you say depends on where they are next. but the truth in open, simple terms, and the people that deserve the truth more than anybody in the world are those people that are next to kin to them. They deserve to know everything.
You have been in this ministry for over 30 years.
Yes.
What keeps you there?
I get to bring the greatest healer to the greatest hurting in Tulsa. And it's a calling. It has to be. It has. People say, how do you do that? And I want to say to a doctor, how do you do your job? I want to say to David Warren, how do you do your job? I could never do what you do.
Well, you actually answer my question in chapter 5. It's one word, passion.
Yes.
You say I use that term instead of love, like I love my job or whatever. I use that term instead of love because so many cower from the word love. A person of passion seldom has to worry about whether or not they have courage. In that moment of testing, they do not have to decide whether or not they will be courageous. They just are. So, we want our police officers to remain passionate about what they do for our communities.
Right. It's best for us.
So, what can we do as listeners to keep that passion strong?
Yeah. Some of the most powerful things people do, and I hear it from the officers all the time, it just stuns them and it makes such an impact on them, they have to tell someone else. Mm-hmm. And people don't realize it, but some of the most powerful things they can do are the most simple things. Is when you see one, say, I really appreciate what you do. I'm praying for you. If you see them sitting down having their coffee and donut, or if you see them having their lunch, buy their lunch for them. Officers come by and said, you won't believe this. A citizen bought my lunch today. He said, they just came by and said, I want to buy your lunch, and they bought it. Those are the things that make them, it would make us all proud of what we do, and we'd want to do it better. And we'd also have a contact with the community that says we love each other, so let's respect each other.
Are police officers reading your new book?
Yes, it's pretty neat. Some of them, I intentionally left out names and stuff, and some of them will call me and say, hey, I know who you're talking about. I was there. So, yeah, they are. They're reading it. They know that it's true. They don't like to say that they've been that tender in some moments that are in there, but it's true. Because the old way of law enforcement was, take no guff, cut no slack, cuff them and stuff them, and never look back. That was some of the things I heard when I first came, and it's still a game. That's still kind of a fun thing. They don't look at it that way, but they play at it that way.
So you collected 60 stories.
Yes.
From 30 plus years.
Yes.
And you put the best of the best in this book.
Tried to.
And I love this chapter title of Chapter 6, Jesus Wore a Weave. I thought, because I had not met you yet, and I knew that you must have a good sense of humor.
Well, it was a lesson for me. I'll never forget it.
Tell us about it.
Okay. Well, there was an apartment fire one night. The fire department called and said they had a fatality, and I don't know if you've been around fire trucks, but they always smell like diesel, and I don't know why they leak water, but they leak water everywhere. It was late at night. I came around the apartment complex. You could see your breath in the air. It was so cold, and the water was freezing. And sitting on the curb was a kid about 14 years old, and he was overweight, so he looked a lot older than he was. But he was sitting in his briefs, not boxers, his briefs, and that's all he had. He was huddled on the corner. His mom had been handicapped, and she was in bed, and someone had thrown a Coke bottle through the window. They'd mistaken him for a gang member. And so they threw a Coke bottle with gas in it through the window, and it ignited. His mother was very overweight, and he couldn't move her. So he ran to get help, and by the time he got back, it was too late. The apartment was engulfed, and Mom was gone. And there he was sitting on the corner, freezing, apartment dwellers all around. And I thought, I could get this kid some clothes. And I would go to one person, and I would say to them, do you have anything in your house we can put on this kid? It's cold, and he's sitting here in his underwear. He's just incredibly embarrassed. And one after the other would tell me things like, hey, the clothes are expensive. I just can't give them away. And I couldn't believe nobody would say yes. I came upon this guy. He was very handsome, black man with a very beautiful woman standing beside me. He had this expensive jogging suit on. You could tell just by looking at it. His hair was in weaves and long, shoulder length. And I thought, this guy's never gonna, well, could care less about what's going on. But I asked him anyway. I said, would you have something in your apartment I could get this kid? And he looked at me and unzipped that jogging suit top and handed it to me and took his bottoms off and stood there in his boxer shorts and no shirt and handed me that beautiful jogging suit to go to give that young man. Sorry. And at that moment, I realized Jesus stood there, and a black man that might have been the picture of what you would think would be completely different. But he had a heart. And I walked over and I gave him that young man, and he put them on. He was big enough that they fit. And I walked away that night thinking, God, you are everywhere, and there's no telling where you're going to show up next.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you, David. You're very generous. Thank you.
What's your goal for this book?
I would love to see it change the attitude of a nation. I would love to see it cause people to pray more for police officers. I would love to see it be something to help them, the community, come together with them. And if it does that, that's more than enough.
And teachers could read this in their classroom.
Oh, I never thought about that. That would be huge. It would be huge.
Talk about changing some attitudes
it would be
of the next
huge.
generation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, David. Very kind.
Well,
very generous.
We've got a couple minutes left. I'm going to tell people how they can get the book. But is there anything on your heart that we haven't picked at today or talked about?
Yes, there is. My job is a paid job, and it's to recruit and train new chaplains. And I just got to tell you that the men and women that dedicate themselves to volunteer to do this work, they're from every denomination. But we call them at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning to go doing some of the things you just saw in this book. And they do it readily. They do it with all their heart. And if there's anything I could say is pray for them. I love them. I'd do anything I could for them. And they're here to serve Jesus by serving the people.
Danny Lynchard has been our guest today, Director of Chaplaincy for both the Tulsa Police and Fire Departments, and author of the new book we've discussed, The Heart of a Cop, Stories of Personal Faith from the Line of Duty. This book is available on Amazon, so that would be Amazon.com as the address you type in on your computer, and then look for the book, The Heart of a Cop, Danny Lynchard, Lynchard. Danny Lynchard. Well, Pam Norwood has been here along for the ride, or we'll call it a ride-along, roadshow ride-along.
It was a great ride.
And your son is working on becoming a police officer.
He's in school right now.
How do you feel now after the hour?
I feel much better. The mom part is like, but, when you say you're going to serve your community, that's what he wants to do, serve his community.
And serve the Lord.
Yeah, serve the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, David.
Again, thank you, Danny. Danny Lynchard. For Danny Lynchard and Pam Norwood, I'm David Warren, and what has it been? Another great roadshow. You've been listening to The Roadshow. If you'd like to write to us, here's our address. The Roadshow, P.O. Box 1924, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74101. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. The views of today's guest aren't necessarily those of this station, but we do appreciate and thank our guest for spending this time with us. The Roadshow, an Oasis Network presentation.